The golden mark on my palm didn't just glow, it burned with a rhythmic, pulsing heat that made my breath hitch every time Draven walked into the room. I was Sharon, a human translator who had barely escaped the slums with a $50 debt. But now, 200 of the deadliest predators in the north were watching my every step like I was their goddess, and their greatest weakness. The forbidden scroll was far from finished, and as the ink began to move on its own, writing a prophecy that demanded a life for a life, I realized that being the anchor didn't mean I was safe. It meant I was the first target on a list that was growing by the hour. Draven's grip on my waist tightened, his eyes flashing a molten gold that promised to burn the world down just to keep me breathing. But even a king couldn't stop the scroll from claiming its next victim. Don't forget to subscribe, check the channel for part 1 and for more videos, and comment Wolf if you're ready for the rest of part 2. The crown Draven had placed on my head felt like a lead weight, but it was the mark on my palm that truly anchored me to the floor. Every time the heart of a werewolf in the stronghold skipped a beat, I felt a sharp, electric twitch in my wrist. I was no longer Sharon, the girl who had to count every penny just to afford a bowl of thin broth. I was the heartbeat of the north, and it was a heavy burden to carry for someone who still had ink under her fingernails from her old life. I stood at the high window of the solar, looking out over the jagged peaks of the Morcant territory. The snow was falling in thick, silent sheets. Oh, but I didn't feel the cold. The Lycan King's bloodbind had turned my body into a furnace. "Step back from the glass," a voice rumbled. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Draven. His presence felt like a physical pressure against my back, a wave of cedar and storm fronts. "I'm fine, Draven," I said, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. My knees were still trembling, a residual tremor from the ritual that had nearly shattered my human frame. No. Just one word, a command that brooked no argument. He was at my side in a heartbeat, his large hand wrapping around my waist to pull me away from the window. His touch sent a jolt through the mark on my palm, a golden spark that briefly illuminated the dim room. "The South has sent a gift," he said, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the horizon. "In a translation of the second half of the scroll, they claim it was found in the ruins of the old temple." "You don't believe them," I stated. "I believe they want you dead," he growled, his grip on me tightening until I could feel the hard planes of his chest through my dress. "They know that without the translator, the North is just a pack of dogs without a leash." I looked at my hands. I had spent 20 years being invisible, a girl who could read the languages of the dead while the living ignored her. Now my life was worth more than the $5,000 bounty the Southern Pax had placed on my head, a number that made my stomach churn every time I thought about it. "Bring it in," I said. "Sharon, Draven, bring it in. I need to know what they think they've found." He let out a low, frustrated sound, but he didn't let go of me. He pulled me toward the obsidian pedestal where the new parchment sat, looking innocent under the torchlight. But as I reached out, the air in the room suddenly turned freezing. The ink on the new scroll wasn't bone ink. It was shifting, bubbling like boiling tar. Before my fingers could touch the surface, a scream erupted from the courtyard below, a sound of pure, primal agony that made the mark on my hand turn a blinding, violent red. I looked at Draven, my breath hitching in my throat as my body betrayed my logic, and I lurched toward the door. "The prophecy," I whispered, the words coming to me before I could even read them. "It's not a gift, Draven. It's a countdown." The scream wasn't human. It was the sound of a wolf spirit being torn from its hide, a jagged, raw sound that tore through the stone walls of the stronghold. But Draven's hand moved from my waist to my wrist, his grip iron tight, his knuckles turning white. "Stay." One word, a command that should have locked my feet to the floor, but my body didn't listen to the king. It listened to the mark. The red pulse in my palm acted like a compass, dragging me toward the balcony. My legs moved of their own accord, walking me straight into the path of danger while my mind screamed for me to run the other way. Down in the courtyard, Silas, the lieutenant who had once tried to kill me, was writhing on the stones. The gift scroll from the south had unfurled in his hands, but it wasn't parchment anymore. It was a swarm of black ink-like shadows that were burrowing into his skin, turning his veins a sickly, bruised purple. "Sharon, get back!" Draven roared, but he was already jumping the railing, shifting mid-air into a silver-furred beast of pure nightmare. I didn't stop. I ran down the winding stone stairs, my breath coming in jagged gasps. When I reached the courtyard, the 200 wolves were there, circled around Silas, but they weren't helping. They were cowering, their ears pressed back in a display of primal submission. The shadows from the scroll formed letters in the air, floating like smoke above the dying lieutenant. "The anchor holds the weight, but the king pays the price," I read aloud. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like something ancient, vibrating with a power that made the courtyard floor tremble. Silas looked up at me, his eyes leaking that same black ink. "Kill me," he wheezed. "It's eating the pack." I felt it then, a sharp, stinging pain in my own chest. Through the bind, I could feel the life being sucked out of every wolf in the stronghold. They were falling to their knees again, not in respect this time, but in deathly exhaustion. Draven, in his human form now, crouched over Silas, trying to rip the shadows away with his bare hands. His palms were smoking, the golden light of our bind clashing with the black rot of the south. "Draven, stop, it's a siphon!" I screamed. He didn't listen. He wouldn't. His protective instinct was a blind spot the size of a mountain. I grabbed the edge of the shadow scroll. The moment my skin touched the darkness, the courtyard went silent. The shadows didn't burn me. They flowed into the mark on my palm, turning the gold to a dark, ominous violet. Silas slumped, unconscious but breathing. The pack gasped as the pressure lifted, but I was the one falling now. Draven caught me before I hit the stone. His eyes were wild, a mix of fury and soul-deep fear. "I told you to stay," he hissed, his voice trembling with a rage that was meant for the world, not for me. "If I stayed, you would have died," I whispered, the purple ink on my hand pulsing like a second heart. "The South doesn't want me dead, Draven. They want me to be the weapon that kills you." The private solar was quiet, save for the crackle of the fire. Draven had carried me up here and hadn't left my side for 3 hours. He was currently kneeling at my feet, washing the grime of the courtyard from my legs with a warm cloth. It was a soft domestic sight that felt jarring in a fortress built for war. The Lycan King, a man who had spent 6 years feeling nothing, was now meticulously cleaning the skin of a human girl. "You shouldn't be doing that," I murmured. "Quiet." Short. Final. He reached for my hand, the one with the purple mark. He didn't flinch. He kissed the center of my palm, his lips warm against the cold, dark ink. "The Southern ambassador arrives tomorrow," he said, his voice low. "He will come to apologize for the faulty scroll. He thinks he's coming to a funeral." "And what is he actually coming to?" I asked. Draven looked up, his eyes a cold, predator gold. "An execution." I felt a shiver run down my spine, but it wasn't fear of Draven. It was the thrill of the bind. For a girl who had once been terrified of a tavern owner over a $50 debt, the idea of facing an ambassador of the South should have been impossible. But with Draven's hand in mine, the $50 felt like a joke from a previous life. "Wait," I said, my body suddenly stiffening. "Oh, the scroll. It's moving again." I looked at the obsidian pedestal across the room. The forbidden scroll was unrolling itself, the bone ink forming a map of the stronghold. But there was a red dot moving through the secret tunnels. Tunnels only the king and his inner circle knew about. Draven saw it too. "Betrayal," he whispered. He didn't reach for a sword. He reached for me. "Read it, Sharon. Tell me who is in my house." The red dot on the scroll wasn't just moving, it was vibrating, a frantic pulse that mirrored the frantic beating of my heart. The secret tunnels of Morcant were supposed to be the fortress's last line of defense, a labyrinth of silver-lined stone designed to keep the Lycan bloodline safe from the outside world. Now they were a back door for a killer. "Stay," Draven said again. He was already reaching for a fur-lined cloak to throw over my shoulders. "I'm the only one who can see the map, Draven," I argued, my fingers tracing the glowing parchment. "The moment you move, the scroll will stop showing the path to anyone but the anchor." He didn't like it. His jaw was set so tight I could hear the bone grind. He didn't want his queen in the damp, dark belly of the mountain, but the bind was whispering to him, telling him what I already knew. We were two halves of a single weapon now. "Behind," he ordered, short, possessive. We descended into the dark. The air in the tunnels was thick with the scent of wet earth and something else, something metallic and sharp, like the smell of a lightning strike. As we rounded the third corner, my body betrayed me. My logic told me to stay behind Draven's massive frame, and to let the king handle the monster in the dark, but the purple mark on my hand flared with a cold, violet light, and my legs suddenly lunged forward. I wasn't running. I was being pulled. "Sharon!" Draven hissed, but I was already slipping through a narrow fissure in the rock that his massive shoulders couldn't fit through. I burst into a hidden chamber, my hand glowing like a torch. Standing there, over a crate of unstable moonfire crystals, was the Southern Ambassador, the man who was supposed to arrive tomorrow. But he wasn't alone. Standing next to him was the king's own healer, the man who had supposedly been tending to the pack's wounds for a decade. "The anchor is here," the healer whispered, his eyes void of any emotion. "The scroll was right. She can't help but follow the ink." The ambassador smiled, a slow, oily expression. "Then let's see how much weight this anchor can actually hold before she snaps." I tried to scream for Draven, but the purple ink from my hand suddenly leaped from my skin, wrapping around my throat like a living shadow, silencing me. Behind the wall, I could hear Draven's fists hammering against the stone, the sound of a god trying to break through a mountain to get to his mate. "Don't bother," the ambassador said, stepping closer. He held a small silver dagger, its blade etched with the same bubbling black ink I'd seen in the courtyard. "The king is strong, but he's bound to your life. If your heart stops, his spirit shatters. The north falls without a single drop of Lycan blood being spilled." He raised the dagger. "My logic told me this was the end. I was just a human girl. I couldn't fight a trained assassin and a traitorous healer." But the language didn't care about my logic. The mark on my hand didn't just glow, it exploded. The shadows around my throat were sucked into my palm, and for a second, I could feel every word ever written in the forbidden scroll. I knew the name of the wind, the secret of the silver, and the word for unmaking. "Sol Vora!" I didn't speak it, the room spoke it. The air itself shattered. The silver dagger turned to dust in the ambassador's hand. The healer was thrown against the wall, his mind wiped clean by the sheer force of the primal tongue. The stone wall behind me finally gave way as Draven burst through, a literal force of nature. He didn't look at the enemies. He went straight for me, his hand shaking as he cupped my face. "Are you whole?" He gritted out each word like it was a struggle to stay in his human skin. I am," I whispered, though my hand was now jet black from the wrist down. Draven turned to the ambassador, who was crawling toward the exit. The king's eyes weren't gold anymore. They were a terrifying, endless black. "You touched her," Draven said. It wasn't a question. It was a death sentence. "Wait," I said, grabbing his arm. "The scroll. It says there's more. The ambassador is just a pawn. The real master is already in the Great Hall." Draven paused, his muscles corded like steel cables. Through the bind, I felt his murderous intent shift into something even more dangerous. Calculation. "Then we go to the hall," he said. He picked me up, ignoring the black ink staining his own skin where he touched me, and we show them why the north does not bleed. The doors to the Great Hall didn't just open. They were blasted off their hinges by the sheer force of Draven's presence. The 200 wolves who had been murmuring in the shadows went instantly silent, the air in the room turning to ice as the king walked in, carrying me like a prize he had stolen from the claws of death. At the far end of the hall, standing where I had first read the forbidden scroll, was Elder Thorn. He wasn't a warrior. He was a relic, his skin like yellowed parchment, and his eyes 2 pits of cold, calculating silver. "Drop the human, Draven," Thorn said, his voice a dry rasp that carried across the stone. "She is not an anchor. She is a parasite. Look at her hand. The black ink is the Unmaking. She is eating you from the inside out." Draven didn't drop me. He set me on my feet, but his hand stayed clamped on my shoulder, his fingers digging into my cloak. "Oh, lie." Short, sharp, deadly. "Is it?" Thorn stepped forward, holding up a shard of the moonfire crystal. "The South didn't send that scroll to kill you, Draven. They sent it to reveal her. A true anchor brings life. She brings the void. Look at your men. Look at their eyes." I looked. The 200 wolves weren't bowing. They were twitching. The black ink on my hand was pulsing in time with their heartbeats, and every time it throbbed, a thin line of darkness crept up their necks. My logic told me to run, to apologize, to beg Thorn to fix me. But my body didn't listen. My black-stained hand rose into the air against my will. My fingers began to dance, weaving through the cold air as if I were plucking invisible strings. "Sharon, stop!" Draven whispered, his voice laced with a rare note of uncertainty. I can't," I choked out. And I wasn't just Sharon anymore. I was a conduit. I felt the pain of every wolf in the room, the hunger, the fear, the $50 debts of their own lives, and I started to pull. Korvath met! The scream that left my lips wasn't human. It was a sonic boom of ancient power. The black ink didn't spread. It retracted. It flew out of the wolves, out of Silas in the infirmary, and out of the king himself, screaming as it was sucked back into my palm. The effort felt like having my soul turned inside out. I felt my ribs creak under the pressure. My vision went white, then red, then a deep, settling gold. Elder Thorn screamed as the moonfire crystal in his hand turned to ash. "No, it was supposed to consume you." "Enough." Draven moved. He didn't use a weapon. He simply reached Thorn and placed a hand over the old man's mouth. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any roar. "You used my pack as a laboratory," Draven said, his voice a low, vibrating hum of pure alpha authority. "You tried to poison the only light this fortress has seen in 6 years." He looked back at me. I was swaying, my black-stained hand now glowing with a soft, steady gold. The Unmaking had been purified. I hadn't eaten the pack. I had filtered them. "Silas!" Draven called out. The scarred lieutenant limped into the hall, looking pale but standing tall. He looked at me, then at Thorn, then he dropped to one knee, voluntarily this time. "She saved us, Elder," Silas said, his voice thick with emotion. "She didn't just hold the leash, she took the bite for us." Draven turned his gaze back to Thorn. "Take him to the border, strip his rank. And if he ever steps foot on Morcant soil again, the anchor won't be the one he has to fear." 2 weeks later, the Great Hall was finally warm. The smell of iron and wet fur had been replaced by cedar and roasting meat. I sat in the solar, my black-stained hand now a permanent, elegant tattoo of golden filigree that looked like jewelry against my skin. I was no longer the girl with a $50 debt. I was the woman who had filtered the darkness of the north. Draven walked in, carrying a small, heavy wooden box. He didn't say a word. He just placed it on my lap.
"This mark binds
Open.
our souls for eternity.
Inside were 50
Forever
gold
entwined
coins,
in this warm
each
light.
one stamped
Our
with the
love will
crest
never
of the
fade.
Morcant King.
Nor will this eternal
The debt
glow.
is paid, he said, his hand resting protectively on the small of my back. But the tavern owner doesn't want the money, and he wants to know if the Queen needs a new shipment of ink. I laughed. The sound brightened real in the quiet room. I think I'm done with ink for a while, Draven. He pulled me up, his arms wrapping around me, his forehead resting against mine. In the soft domestic light of the dying fire, he looked alive. You saved me, Sharon, he whispered, not just from the scroll, from the silence. Seems like love cures what magic can't, I said, repeating the words the scroll had hinted at so long ago. He kissed my temple, his grip tightening just for a second. It does. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of part 2. If you loved seeing Sharon and Draven finally defeat the shadows, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. Now, and I have to ask you, if you were Sharon, would you have sacrificed yourself to save the wolves who originally feared you? Yes or no? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one and I can't wait to hear what you think.